Dr. Nass, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So how are you feeling today?
Brilliant.
I know we're saying brilliant. You just said you were on your holidays for quite some time, but you seem to get a little bit antsy when you're away from work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just trying to get that work-life balance. I don't know, maybe work's becoming an obsession and hobby / work. So yeah, I don't know, miss it. Never thought I'd be like that.
So for everyone that I have on the podcast, generally I go through like, how did they get to that position of wanting to be so passionate about their job? So where did that start?
Well, you see, I don't think it was kind of one event, and I think it's difficult to kind of date it to a particular time. But I mean, I was the classic kind of grew up in the UK, kind of second generation immigrant family. Both parents were doctors. You kind of got out what you put in. There was a large focus on academia. So it was kind of...
Where's your parents from?
Iraq. Both parents from Iraq. And it was kind of like, you know, if you were academic enough, you did medicine, basically. Which, you know, in hindsight, is kind of like, well, at 17 and you choosing your place at university, how are you meant to know what you want to do? But anyway, that was it. And I wouldn't say at that point I had a particular passion for it. It was almost like a route that you sort of predestined for. And then it was really, I think, actually during university, I was quite lucky because one of the professors I was studying with or working with or under was one of the lead researchers into creatine. And this was kind of towards the end of the 90s. And just really started getting to sort of looking at nutrition and optimizing, you know, supplements and just learning things that you weren't taught in your traditional course. And then later became a general practitioner or family physician, as they call us here. And you just realize over time that the health model isn't set up to really keep people well and thriving. And yeah, just kind of got a little bit disgruntled and kind of through also at the same time trying to optimize my own well-being, realized that there's got to be a different way of doing it and stumbled upon functional medicine. Again, also realized that UK wasn't the place to kind of practice that kind of health provision and came to the land of opportunity, which was the UAE, which actually, interestingly, even at that time, and this is 2015, no one really knew what functional medicine was. People spoke, I guess, about wellness and integrative health, but it was still considered pretty peripheral and wasn't really a kind of someone you would go and kind of see as part of your health provision. But that's obviously changed in recent years, and I guess we can talk about that.
So to go back to the family roots, did you grow up in a strict household then if doctors seemed like the pathway that you should go in your career?
I think it was pretty much kind of, you know, if you had any inkling of going and doing something else, it's kind of like, well, what's the justification?
Yeah.
You know, why? Why would you? And so strict in the sense that they were obviously trying to set us up for something, you know, vocational and secure. And I guess that's the kind of immigrant mentality. And, you know, the beauty of medicine and healthcare is you'll always find your niche within the system. Even within a you know, subspecialty, you'll have two people doing completely different things. I mean, take me, for example, I'm a family physician, but what I do is very different to, say, what 98% of family physicians do. So if you have a passion and an interest in something, you'll be able to carve it out.
Being from Iraq and then being in the UK, did you grow up with any struggles because of where you were from, essentially?
You know what? I was quite lucky in that sense, and I didn't really. And I think a large part of that was actually, and I do put that down to my parents, they were quite forward thinking, and they were very much about integrating us well. They didn't want us to be kind of different, whilst obviously, you know, we'd maintain, you know, a link to our kind of heritage. They very much wanted us to sort of get into sport and you know, do what everyone else was doing. So I never really felt like there was any real difference or anything that particularly held me back.
So there was no kids at school that felt like you were different or anything?
Well, no, because I think I grew up, well, I was in Cheshire, but the school was a private school in Manchester, and it was very multicultural then. So a significant part of the school year was, from Asia, or, there's a big Muslim population. There was a big Jewish population, and it was, this discipline was quite a sort of big part of the kind of school. So there was zero tolerance for kind of that sort of thing. So it wasn't really present, to be honest.
So with the household, did you have brothers and sisters growing up as well?
Yeah, so two brothers, older brother, younger brother, and you guessed it, older brother ended up in medicine as well. I think by the time it came to my younger brother, they'd kind of relaxed a little bit, and he ended up going into law, which was obviously, again, another vocational degree, effectively. But I guess that's a general trend, isn't it? As the parents get more comfortable, both, I guess, in the kind of understanding of the system and, wealth, and they ease off. I mean, we see it with our own kids. We're a lot more laid back with the youngest.
Was there any competition amongst all you guys being in medicine then? Because, I can imagine so.
Yeah, I think not. Well, when I see the way that my kids compete, not to that kind of level, but yeah, I mean, there was always that benchmark. I don't think it was something that caused stress. But I think I was of a personality where I obviously wanted to kind of do better. I guess putting it on the table, I think my older brother was definitely more academic than I was. So I think I almost felt like I had to work harder. And I think also as a product of the circumstances, there was a couple of the people in my school year who we were friendly, but, competitive. And so I think that kind of pushed me. But nothing that kind of scarred me. But I think, who knows? I mean, maybe subconsciously that's probably, there was competition there, and that's, I guess, what drives me as well today.
So where did you work in the UK then?
So in a traditional kind of, once I'd kind of specialized into general practice, you just imagine you're kind of in a city, place called Oldham, north of Manchester, very deprived. You kind of usual bread and butter, acute sort of coughs and colds and infections, and then a lot of the kind of cardiometabolic stuff, obesity, type 2 diabetes, mental health, and yeah, just wasn't for me.
What was it not for you? Like, what was the elements that you
the whole it just the day-to-day stuff wasn't my passion in terms of how we were dealing with it. So I just didn't have the time nor even the training to sit there and prevent people from developing cardiometabolic problems, and never mind kind of reversing it. Yeah, I just think the kind of administrative tasks and hoops that you had to jump through, and the kind of the cost savings that constantly kind of being run down you working in the public system just wasn't something I was interested in.
Was there a pinnacle moment where you just thought you had enough?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've told this story a few times. Dubai was, and the UAE was always on my radar because I had a few friends who'd come out years before, and it was always something, we would visit every year, and it would pique my interest, and I'd be like, right, I'd get home and I'd want to go there. And just in terms of how the health system's set up here, it's not as easy for family physicians to get in, certainly back then, because there wasn't that kind of model of care. So it was always on the radar, but absolutely. There was a moment where I was just looking out of my window in my GP surgery. It was, as you can imagine, raining. I had a view on my left of an Undertaker's, and there was an Aldi supermarket on my right. And I just thought, I cannot sit here for the next 30 years of my career.
And at that moment, then, how long did it take you to have that transition to Dubai?
So I think it happened pretty soon after that, but that was just pure luck, because I was looking before. And then just the opportunity came about to move to Abu Dhabi first. And yeah, I was kind of lucky because the owner of the clinic, or certainly the clinic they were setting up, wanted to almost, he was a bit of a visionary in that he wanted to change the model of care. He wanted to move it from a US-based system to, having your family practitioner and then your regular doctor, and then you go off into the system through that family doctor. And I think he was just probably a bit too soon, or the problem with the system being very heavily revenue focused, it was never a model that was going to work. So, but fortunately, it got me out here, and then I took my next steps after that.
So, what was the next steps from Abu Dhabi then?
Yeah, so I got to Abu Dhabi when I arrived. Actually, very early on, realized that kind of model of care wasn't going to work, but saw it as a foundation to start implementing what I saw as the next generation of healthcare that was based on the functional medicine approach, but was bringing in genomics, gut health testing. And it was at a time where no one, I think there was probably one or two people regionally who were doing it, but that was more in Dubai, certainly not in Abu Dhabi. And straight away I could see the uptake from it, but we kind of deviated paths in terms of how we saw where things were going. And I was just also fortunate that I met my current partner in DNA Health. And it's funny how you meet people and you just know that you're going to complement each other really well. And, my strengths were his weaknesses and vice versa, because, I'm sure we'll get into it. There's no way I could have built what we have now by myself. And yeah, we've stuck to it. And I think timing wise, I don't want to say it's luck, but I think it was a good time, because if you want to say COVID was a good thing, I don't think it was. But for our business, it changed people's mentality and health seeking behavior. And there's been a real sort of transformation in, I think, people realizing that their regular health system and the health insurance is just that. It's an insurance for when you're sick or you're really ill, but it's not designed to keep you well. And so more and more people are investing in their health and coming to us to execute that.
So when you were just mentioning about your partner, how do you define whether someone's a good person to partner with? Is it an intuition? Is it some research you did? Like, how, as an entrepreneur or as someone in the medical field who is looking to do exactly what you've done, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think, when I'm looking at it from my perspective and in the scenario I was in, I mean, doctors, no matter how much they may think they are, they're not good business people.
Exactly. That's how I see so many doctors partner with the wrong people, and it's they're amazing at their craft, but then they try and do it alone, and I think that's a big ask. And that's also coming from someone who I studied in an MBA, and fine, the network was great at the time, but it definitely did not equip me with particularly great skills to actually run a real business. It may help you, I think, in a corporate environment, but from my personal experience it didn't really help me in practice in kind of what we were doing in a certainly a small business at that time. But, what was it about my partner? I think I could just see that, it sounds really cheesy, just that kind of drive and glint in his eye. And, don't get me wrong, he had a solid background as well. I mean, this was someone who was a banker at, Goldman Sachs level, M&A, family office, and just everything he kind of touched seemed to work. Combining it not just with intelligence, it was just a great strategist and just hard worker. And I think one of the lines that he used, and he still uses today when he meets people, is I will run through walls for people. I will just get stuff done. And to this day, I mean, how far are we in now? We met in 2017. There's just some people are just have that combination where it's just like whatever they'll do, they'll make it succeed. And just also that ability to figure things out. I mean, you hear it. I mean, obvious examples, I don't know, it's extreme, but kind of your Elon Musk's of the world, just whatever they put their mind to, they're just going to it's going to blow up. And okay, it's not to that same level, but it's just finding those people. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not doing myself enough credit. I mean, I saw the vision in terms of where I knew healthcare or thought healthcare was going, and ultimately just knew what good practice was when people kind of just thought it was witchcraft and doubted it and stuck to it. Which actually, I often reflect on this, coming from a background where my parents, naturally, again, immigrant family doctors, so risk averse. for me to then, not go and just work as a family physician in one of these regular like hospital brands, which I actually had offers from, and to kind of just make that jump into a small business that was in negative equity and hardly any revenue, people thought I was mad. Certainly my parents did. But the way I looked at it was a completely measured risk, and I backed it. I was investing, in him, the vision, and just I knew that I could always just fall back and go and do what I was doing if all went tits up.
Was there any day during this startup where you thought maybe this is going to fail?
All the time, yeah. I mean, everyone says that, don't they? I mean, they'd be lying if they didn't. Yeah, all the time.
How do you manage that?
I think it's really hard to go from doing something that you're so passionate about that should succeed and will at some point succeed, to then going into something that you're not particularly that interesting. And that just for me was soul destroying. And I think also just seeing it as a failure just wasn't something that I'd experienced. I probably failed my driving test once, but aced pretty much any other exam. So it's kind of it wasn't a feeling that I was used to. So just got to crack on. And I think it's just wiring as well, and coming back to that kind of competitiveness maybe, and being pushed in a kind of private school and then medicine. You just get on with it. You've got resilience. You just get on with it. The night shifts, that was at a time when you were doing night shifts. You didn't have seniors in the hospital. There's people having cardiac arrests on the ward. You're being woken up at 3 a.m. to deliver a baby, a C-section. You've watched one, and you're basically bleeding it the next time. So there's that kind of around, and I think that just builds up resilience.
When you talk about resilience in those kind of moments, do you feel like medicine has made you become desensitized to certain situations?
I mean, desensitized to kind of, I guess, probably like death, and if someone's limb was hanging off, yeah, compared to your average person, but not desensitized, I think, in any other way, because again, a large part of our role is kind of compassion and the kind of soft skills. I think it's probably the majority of what we're doing. If I'm looking at physicians that we're hiring now and assessing people and how commenting on how good they are as a physician, I mean, it's almost a given that you should know the clinical stuff. Often kind of, you've got to develop that relationship. There's a huge amount of trust. People are kind of sitting with you and telling you things that they often never told anyone else. It's probably the few occasions where they can come in and let their guard down. And just particularly now with the health problems that we certainly deal with, it's you've got to be pretty switched on in terms of picking up cues. Again, sometimes you only get if you have that sort of relationship.
How do you manage because it's kind of like counseling in some sense, because you're taking a lot off someone, if they're giving you a lot of information. How do you manage to place that in a box away from your current lifestyle? Because sometimes I can imagine you probably take it home with you.
You see, I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing, so I wouldn't say that there's many scenarios where I'm going home kind of reflecting and kind of stressing. So obviously I reflect, but not in a kind of stressed way.
Yeah.
Stuff goes wrong, and say client will call me out of hours and there's an issue. Yeah, of course I'm kind of on it and concerned about it at that moment in time, but I'm not dwelling on things in that sense.
That's good.
In terms of how I sort of deal with the information when it's being imparted, a lot of it comes down to just pattern kind of recognition and a kind of skill that you develop over time when you've seen enough kind of cases, and you kind of just know how to sort of, as you say, put things to a side, and not necessarily because you're kind of just leaving it and forgetting about it, but it may come in useful sort of later on. But you're right, because often when clients come in, they don't know how to impart the information. They've got so many things that they need to tell you that have happened over, say, a 10-year timeline, and it's just being regurgitated out. Or, they're nervous, or, they're worried about forgetting certain information. So it's just completely haphazard. You just kind of learn how to put it all together.
Yeah. So functional medicine, can you simplify that for the listener? What is functional medicine?
Yeah, and I get asked it all the time, and I probably spent the first 10 years not explaining it very well, and we'll give it a go. For me, I think it's just good medicine, in that it's not a specific type of medicine. It's just more an approach in whereby you're not just isolating systems. So, if you look at the traditional health system, it's amazing. If you have a rare condition, you want a specialist who's seen that 1,000 times and that's all they do, or a surgeon who does that operation 100 times a year. You want to go to them for that. But if you look at a lot of the health problems that people suffer with today, your health doesn't act in individual systems. Your hormones influence your immune system, your gut influences your hormones, your mental health influences everything else. And so as the health system's gone down one route, these sorts of problems have been neglected. So functional medicine is an approach where you're looking at all of those systems together, taking a kind of history, I guess a more detailed way, and kind of ultimately linking it all together to give someone an outcome whereby you're optimizing their health, whether that's how they feel, or whether you're preventing a certain disease or even reversing a disease. I wouldn't say there's a particular type of, is it based on allopathic? Is it based on, I think it's kind of combining the best of Western medicine with some, I guess, traditional Eastern practices as well.
So have you seen any sort of increase in like gut health decreasing now in modern society, as like we have a lot more convenience foods, especially in Dubai? If we look at so much food that's not grown locally, right? So yeah, do you see this?
Yeah, and I kind of reflect on this a lot. I'm sure there is. I guess the thing is as well, over time, if you've been a practitioner in a certain area, even though we consider ourselves generalists, you'll always have areas where you'll become, sort of say, more known for. And that's probably just more if you've had a number of cases, and I guess through word of mouth, you start seeing more of these things. And gut health is probably one of those that I see a lot of, as well as, hormonal optimization is as well. But coming back to that point I made earlier, fine, they may come in primarily presenting with symptomology from their gut. But actually, you're still taking the same approach of, well, are the hormones influencing this? Are they just stressed, and their adrenals are also messing up their, gut motility and production of digestive enzymes? So you can't, again, just look at things in isolation, but definitely, more gut issues. And I think in large, a lot of that is to do with the change in nutrition. What are the things? I think environmental medicine's becoming big. That still isn't on the radar of a lot of people, even a lot of integrative practitioners, just because it's just not as well understood. But I think, taking a prime example, sort of on the ground here, you remember when we had the floods, I don't know, 18 months ago now. I would definitely say there's been a surge in people presenting with kind of mold-related illnesses.
Oh, no way.
And it's interesting because, originally you would come to that conclusion because you couldn't find anything else. We get this a lot. We're almost like a last resort.
Like, I need to go get my house.
We can get onto that. But people often come in and say, the first thing they say is, you're my last resort. And, so they will have had every test under the sun, and they've just got this whole array of kind of symptoms that just aren't explained by anything else. And then you start kind of thinking about other things, and you screen them for mold, and you see high levels of mold toxicity. And then you start to question, well, is that just an incidental finding? But then you start to treat them and they get better. So, you'll never know everything. And that's, I think, where a lot of the passion and interest comes from, because it's amazing how you realize over time you'll always have black spots where you'll be unaware of it's just the unknowns. And then you've got unknown unknowns, and it's kind of like over time you start to just think, actually, maybe I should do this. Or you may just read a book of a practitioner who specializes, say, in toxins, and start to think about things differently. Yeah. And you have to keep up to date, because just things are evolving all the time. And I mean, if you're looking at the whole of the human biology and health, it's limitless.
Yeah. So, like, where would, say, the average listener now, like, where do they even start when it comes to optimizing their health? What's the cookie cutter approach here? Because it is like, it can be confusing for the practitioner. How does the general public get away with this?
Yeah, I think, I probably made it sound more complicated than it actually is. I think, I get asked all the time, oh, you're a longevity clinic, or you're a longevity physician. And I think people automatically assume, oh, well, that must be kind of stem cells and peptides and, exosomes and, the kind of regenerative side of things. When actually, no, I mean, 95% of longevity is eating right, exercising, sleeping, managing stress, and then, making sure your nutrients are topped up. These other interventions, okay, they're going to probably have some effect in unknown quantities, but unless you've got the foundations right, you're kind of probably wasting your time or money trying to kind of, jump on a lot of these biohacks.
Just as you said that there, I actually just came up with an idea. It's a bit like dieting. Before, people used to do keto, Dukan diet, no carb diet, whatever it was. But it's kind of very similar now in regenerative medicine. Now it's like people are trying to overcomplicate things rather than just the basics of like eating your meat, veg. But it's just that, okay, more detailed approach now to health.
And I think there's two forces there. I think there's a lot of people don't actually understand the biology or the health systems, and there's commercial interests at play as well. I mean, weight loss is another one.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about today. So GLP-1 drugs, right? What's your thoughts on this? Because I feel like I've lost 26 kilos, right, prior to the whole, to this. And it was a long time ago, 10 years ago. And when GLP-1 drugs came around, I was very much like, no, you need to learn and how to lose weight, and you go through the process and everything. But now I'm starting to see it full circle. Yeah. So I'd like to know your views on this.
Yeah, I'll give you the short sort of answer, because it has been a bit of a journey. I kind of went from writing them off also, or certainly not writing them off, but being very specific in kind of who you used it with. And that was kind of your classic extremely obese or with essentially insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. But I think a large part of the problem is the way, again, most people are being prescribed it still isn't optimal. And I think there are downsides to it, and you don't have to look very far. I mean, you just have to go to the studies that led to the FDA approval of some of these drugs, and look at the studies where they followed people after they stopped the injections, and the vast majority of them regained the weight.
Why do you think that?
I think a couple of reasons. One is that they lost a lot of muscle mass, so naturally the metabolism is slower, and then also as well directly because you're kind of in prolonged caloric restriction, you're getting other metabolic adjustments. So you're kind of just in a far less healthy metabolic state afterwards. Plus, they haven't changed. A lot of them won't have changed their underlying habits. So if you're just going to go back to your same habits, then you're going to regain the weight. Whereas I think if you're using GLP-1s as an adjunct to someone who's changing their underlying lifestyle habits, and you're dosing in the right way, I like to cycle it, which is, again, different to probably how the majority of people are using it. We use minimum effective dose, so we're not escalating to the sorts of dosages that a lot of people are using it. We're tracking metrics like body composition, so there will be people who I feel lose too much muscle or don't have enough muscle to start with, so we won't put them on it. So I think it's just like anything, again, in healthcare, it's about not taking a one-size-fits-all approach and tailoring the use of those drugs to the right people.
So let me just create a little avatar. So for an example, we have Sally. She goes to the gym. She goes to the gym maybe 5 times a week, lifts heavy, eats enough protein. She's an athlete, but she needs to lose a little bit of weight. And she takes Ozempic, for an example. So the lowest dose that she could take. Would that be beneficial for her to be taking that as an athlete?
You see, I've also got to the point where it's actually it's quite difficult to predict with a lot of these sorts of scenarios. So I again, when I first started prescribing them, thought I was very clear about who they were and weren't going to work with. But again, over time, there's people where I thought this is never going to work, and if anything, is going to be harmful to you. And then it's your last option. They've been crying for it for months or years even, and, will prescribe in a very measured way, and they do incredibly well on it. And I just think that speaks to the fact that when, if we look at weight loss as a whole, there's so many mechanisms in that black box between calories in, calories out that we don't fully understand, whether it's genetics, epigenetics, hormonal sort of mechanisms. Often these things you can't predict. Now it's risk management. So I'm being a little bit flippant, but if for example, there'll be a lot of athletes who are probably already overtraining, under-eating, and maybe they're just not sleeping well as well, or they've got high amounts of emotional stress. They'd be scenarios where I'd be less keen to apply it. But I've been surprised again. I mean, there's been some people where they've had huge amounts of stress or they've not been sleeping very well, and then I see them a month later and they're like, I've never felt more clear-headed. I'm calmer. My whatever they're referring to, my inflammation has come down. I guess they're meaning the puffiness and fluid retention. So I'm open-minded. So whilst again we're a lot more, I think, analytical in our approach. Yeah, I'm not closed-minded, and I'll never shut it down in people unless there's a clear kind of cut example where it definitely shouldn't be used. So if someone is massively under-muscled, or there's an eating disorder, or they're already only eating 500 calories a day, no, I'm not going to apply it. But I'm always willing to give it a try in most scenarios if we've exhausted other avenues.
Have you come across any kind of research out there now of the consequences for long-term use of GLP?
Well, I think if you look at it kind of in terms of how long they've been FDA approved for, I mean, they've not really been around
so that's
long
what
enough.
I was wondering, is there anything that you've got your hands on?
No, not really. It's more just people are kind of looking at the mechanisms that it's impacting, and then just kind of saying, oh, it's amazing for longevity, or which I think you can't really necessarily make that jump yet. But I mean, all the spin you're seeing now is more the pharmaceutical industry trying to get it FDA approved for other conditions, which, I mean, isn't, it doesn't surprise me that it helps with dementia or cardiovascular disease. I mean, this comes back to the functional medicine approach. We know that insulin resistance and inflammation and being overweight are risk factors for these conditions. So naturally, you're going to see improvements in the consequences of these problems.
Has there been any kind of issues that you've seen that have come out of people using GLP-1 drugs? Have you witnessed anything personally, any kind of serious side effects or any horror stories?
I think it's more just some people who just almost kind of get stuck on it. And that's kind of, whether that's physical and or psychological. I think the psychological part's the hardest, and I guess we see the same scenario, in men who you put on TRT, testosterone therapy, and when they feel that good, it's very difficult for them to go back to kind of how they were before. If it's in a scenario where you potentially need to cycle it, it's the same with kind of weight loss. Once someone experiences being a certain body weight, even on occasions where, even if they're under muscle, they don't care. I mean, there's a huge element to where, as long as you hit a certain point on the scale, even if it's unhealthy, they don't care, and they'll take it for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I nearly think the GLP-1 industry, like, they need to work alongside a psychologist or someone who's going to mentally support them when they come off utilizing these drugs. And it reminds me of like bodybuilding, essentially, where like whilst you're stage lean, you need to have an end game plan to like mentally prepare yourself that you're not going to ever be that lean ever again. So it's like the coaching that comes after is actually more important than even the process. Well, actually, no, they're both very, very important, because you should learn your behaviors and habits whilst you're on it.
Yeah. Well, and I'll always say to people at the start, it's not about weight loss, it's about fat loss, and it's about sustained fat loss. And I think that's highlights a huge problem in that everyone is too short-termist in looking at the weight that they're losing. Well, so that whether that's a psychologist who helps them with that, or I just think it's good doctoring. I mean, it can be any healthcare practitioner, but I mean, if you look sometimes at the way that some of these, typically endocrinologists are issuing it, it's almost like a conveyor belt prescription with no real attempt to address the underlying kind of root causes. And fine, there'll be some success stories, but equally there's going to be some people where 2 or 3 years down the line, they're going to be back to square one, or even worse, they're developing complications as a result of it.
Are you ever disappointed with the healthcare system in terms of like making a quick buck over actually, treating someone for long term?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of given. Yeah. I mean, that's just the market, I think, internationally. It's not individual to a particular jurisdiction. I think it's particularly worse in the US, where, I mean, you can have 2 people presenting to the same hospital with the same problem with different insurance policy or no insurance policy, and they're charged completely different amounts. There's huge forces at play that are kind of dictating that, and I guess we can only really try to just provide good care at the grassroots, and hope that the health-seeking behavior of people changes where they're demanding a different approach, which they are, but it's still pretty niche. You've got to really have changes on a bigger scale at higher up, and I suppose in the US now, the current head of the health system is trying to make those changes, but even then, I mean, there's only so much you can achieve in a 4-year cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So to move on to a hot topic of peptide therapy, can you explain that?
Yeah, so the huge, I guess, craze more so in the last, I think, 5 to 10 years. I think a combination of just people's focus since COVID, again, on health and wellness, the availability of kind of podcasts, and people taking an interest in wellness podcasts and it being spoken about. And then again, availability, particularly, I mean, regionally, we're lucky because we have, favorable regulations for a lot of these regenerative practices. What are they? I mean, they're chains of amino acids that mimic kind of molecules, often signaling molecules in the body. I mean, 2 obvious examples that people will know about that are just pharma branded examples are insulin is a peptide. The GLP-1s that we've spoken about are peptides. There are just hundreds, if not thousands, of other peptides that haven't necessarily been pharma branded, but have effects, again, some also on body composition, others on immunity, hair and skin. The list kind of goes on, and people are seeing great results. It's one of the hot topics right now.
So BP7 or BP157, is the one that I see often. So can you just unpack that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people are using that as a kind of, it's an anti-inflammatory peptide. So two common scenarios you see in people who are just injured or say recovering from say surgery post-op, or people who are hitting a certain age or they have a level of training where they just need to recover quicker. So that's a nice little biohack that seems to, for a majority of people, get pretty instant and obvious results.
And how can one dose with?
Yeah, so two main avenues, orally or subcutaneous injection, so small insulin-like needles. I personally find that, again, in terms of our experience, the oral stuff works generally better for gastrointestinal issues. But if I have someone with systemic kind of inflammation or the problems we were talking about, I would typically go more for the subcutaneous injections. So, for example, right now I have a tendonitis. I've got a tennis elbow, so I'm injecting BPC. I'm injecting it into the actual tendon.
Yeah.
Again, anecdotally, I'd seem to get better results. You've got to do it with caution, obviously, but probably one of the most popular peptides in prescribing.
If can someone just order that and inject themselves?
Well, so that's kind of, again, where one of the sort of controversies is. I mean, a lot of people they'll be going online and buying it, and they'll be constituting it, so mixing it with a solution and then injecting. At the end of the day, I mean, you're injecting a effectively medicinal product, and you're not always comparing apples with apples. I mean, where's this peptide come from?
Yeah.
What's the purity? What's the stability? So we typically don't recommend that. Our peptides, or certainly the ones that we're issuing and prescribing, are from a compounding pharmacy. So it's regulated. We know that every batch is purity, sterility checked, and they're stable up to 6 months. So that's effectively what you're paying for ultimately. And that's a huge driver as to why people are going online, because there is a cost difference. Plus, also, we have a certain portfolio of peptides that are licensed. As I alluded to earlier, there are hundreds. And so until one's become licensed on the ground and regulated, there's a thirst and hunger for people going and wanting to try them. I mean, a perfect example now, coming back to GLP-1s, is the newer generation retatrutide, which is for those who haven't followed it that closely, you had Ozempic, which blocks a single receptor, and then you have Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide, which blocks 2 receptors, and then you now have retatrutide, which is currently in phase 3 trials and human trials. So it's still being trialed by the pharma industry.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the trial system or the actual mechanism of it, how it works, retatrutide. Yeah, so it works on an additional receptor, glucagon, and the initial results from the pharma studies is that you get more rapid weight loss, and there seems to be better preservation of muscle. But these are just suggestions.
How does that happen? Like, how's that?
Yeah, well, I don't think we fully understand the mechanisms yet conclusively. So that's why it's a case of, well, you've got to hold your horses a little bit and if you are using it, you've got to be very kind of measured in your approach. And it's certainly not something that I would prescribe. I can help guide people, but I think people just have to understand, again, that there's a reason why there's trials. And there's plenty of pharmaceutical drugs that have passed FDA approvals and turned out to, be withdrawn eventually, or side effects have occurred that they weren't aware of, or even worse, suppressed. So to be jumping in and taking a compound that hasn't even gone through human trials yet, I think is pretty cavalier.
How does one manage the quality of what they're taking essentially here, especially in the UAE? Because I nearly feel like all this regenerative medicine that's out there, it's difficult to feel like you can trust certain places. So,
yeah, I think it comes down to, so part of it I would say is reputation of the clinic and the physician. But I mean, I wouldn't just stop at that. You have to kind of almost demand where's the evidence for the kind of quality control. If the trust isn't there.
Yeah.
And anyone who kind of blocks it or refuses to kind of give you that information, then why would you trust the product? If someone asked me for, the sterility check of a peptide or the purity, I'd be able to provide it to them through the pharmacy. If we're giving someone stem cells, they get a actual certificate of their stem cells telling them the volume, the viability, the sterility. So, you have to ask questions, which I think a lot of people struggle to do and aren't. But you should never, it's funny the amount of times that people say to me, I was kind of worried or too scared to kind of ask, or thought that I would offend the doctor, or even what they've asked and they've been very dismissive. I just, you shouldn't be working with that person.
Yeah.
If a very simple rule, I mean, if the person you're working with can't give you simple explanations to your questions and provide you with what you need, they're probably not the person you should be working with.
I think that's great advice. So, Muse cells. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so this is so this is another area again, and it's similar to the sort of peptides where there's some provisional studies showing that this subset of we call them mesenchymal stem cells. So let's just call them stem cells for argument's sake. So the stem cells that people are traditionally using in regenerative medicine, some small scale studies showing that these Muse cells have the potential for even greater regenerative effect. But we're talking very small studies in very specific circumstances. There isn't really any international guideline on best practice on how to kind of produce these stem cells. Plus, regionally, there are regulations for products that you're using, and it comes down to again the fact that who do you trust? There are going to be some places, physicians or clinics where it's a competitive environment, and their only competitive advantage is to try and offer a product where they feel there will be demand regardless of whether the evidence is there or not. Doesn't mean I'm saying that they don't have a superior effect, but how can you also? I can't tell you whether they're potentially going to have a detrimental effect. That's why we have kind of studies. So it's probably a practice you'll see more of, but certainly regionally, it's not something that's licensed or available.
So, what are some of the positive outcomes that you've seen with Muse cells?
Well, so we don't use Muse cells just by the simple fact that there isn't really international sort of guidelines or recommendations on how to apply them. There isn't best practice in terms of how to produce them, so we don't use them. We're using traditional mesenchymal stem cells where we have got evidence into effects on longevity. What do we see? So we see improvements in a variety of different hallmarks of aging or just general well-being of the clients. So there are some people where they'll see improvements in energy, improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness, really sort of strange things like improved sleep quality or visual improvement. So it's actually quite broad.
I'm just looking for something that's going to make me look like a baby.
Well, so then I get, also I think it's important at this point to highlight that I think there's a misconception as to how people think of stem cells and how they're working. I think there's a lot of people where, let's take a knee problem. They'll get the knee injected with stem cells, and they'll think that the stem cells themselves are converting to cartilage or bone or connective tissue. Whilst the stem cells have that ability they only have that ability if they're prompted or pushed under the right circumstances. That's not something, again, whereby it's happening on a commercial level. It's happening experimentally in labs whereby stem cells are being manipulated. But in terms of when it comes to regenerative practice, it's not something that is licensed to be done. And really the way the stem cell is working is that it's influencing ultimately the immune system. So in very simple terms, it's reducing the kind of negative aspects of the immune system and attracting cells and non-cellular products to allow and facilitate regeneration. And there's a limit to what its capacity is. So again, if you have bone on bone in a knee and you're getting pain as a result of that, the stem cell is probably not going to do a huge amount. So you have to be very clear when you're kind of counseling patients on this, because we're not talking about, inexpensive products. And I guess that's a good rule in general. I mean, you have to manage it. A lot of what we do is managing expectations, and you have to be very clear. Otherwise, people are going to potentially end up disappointed.
Yeah, you're not injecting magic into their body and just...
Yeah, contrary again to what they may think, yeah.
So with anti-aging, is there any other kind of methods out there that you see in the future that would be super beneficial?
Yeah, so a product that we're bringing over, very soon in the next couple of months is plasmapheresis, which is, again, I think the best way of describing it is it's kind of dialysis for healthy people. So you're effectively cleaning the plasma. So you're reducing a lot of the inflammatory cytokines or components in the blood that are leading to kind of chronic inflammation, poor healing, poor cellular function, reducing toxins levels. And I think this ties into kind of what I was saying earlier on. I think people are going to start to realize more and more that environmental toxins and medicine and consequently inflammation are huge contributors to aging and disease. And that's where something like this will come in.
So is there any other things that are impacting essentially our aging right now, especially here in the UAE? I see, like, obviously the air quality is so bad here, essentially. Like, we were ranked number 1, I think, as poor air quality, and I think it's summertime anyway. Do you think, aside from UV exposure as well?
It has to be. I think, again, though, it's difficult to kind of measure.
Yeah.
Because I just think it comes to the fact that there's just so many variables that it's difficult to kind of allocate a causal link. A lot of this will be more sort of observational type studies. There's no doubt that it is. I don't think that there's particularly anything that's more individual to here. Yeah, I guess the air quality isn't as good as certain places. And, do I see evidence of that on the ground? Again, I'm not saying this in necessarily a mathematical or analytical way, but definitely, I mean, we see a lot of respiratory issues, particularly in younger kids. But that's not, I can't quote you sort of a study to show that.
So with technology increasing so much in AI, what's your thoughts with doctors using AI? And do you think there's... I'm getting worried to the point of, like, doctors potentially having clients and patients on a conveyor belt and using ChatGPT and maybe overlooking mistakes. Let's say, what's your views on this?
I think it's listen. I think we're seeing it get to a very competent level, and I think I can't remember what I saw a headline the other day where it was predicting that it's going to surpass human intelligence. I think in the next maybe 10.
I think it's already passed. Past that, yeah, it's past that rate.
Okay,
yeah,
right. So then, I think it's the same with any specialty. I mean, ultimately, certainly what I've learned, and I guess what most people are realizing, is that it comes down to more the fact that it's about how you're prompting it. So I think rather than seeing it as necessarily a replacement, which I think you're highlighting as a concern, and it is, because there's still, I think, variables that something like ChatGPT can't account for. But I mean, is it a useful sort of adjunct or something that may improve or facilitate better practice? And medicine's no different to any other industry, so I don't see how it won't. I mean, I think the most obvious example is, look at radiology. I mean, radiology is still pretty primitive when you think about it. You're still using a human eye to look over, what are getting more, better quality, but still imperfect images. So you've got an imperfect image that may not capture something, and then you've got human error interpreting it. I mean, already there's studies that exist that are showing that machines can do it better. So straight away, that's a specialty where I see almost becoming kind of obsolete.
Yeah.
When it comes to, I think, the more patient-facing specialties, I don't see, I mean, maybe, Star Trek 100 years will be eliminated, but I don't see that happening in the next few decades, because think that there's certain prompts and cues and soft skills that machines and AI won't be able to replicate. But it's scary. I mean, isn't it? How, if well prompted, the level of what it can potentially come out with. But I mean, you shouldn't be used blindly. I mean, it's like anything. It's kind of, you've got to still understand what you're looking at, whether that's medicine or something else. Take a lawyer, for example. I mean, a lawyer, it can draft contracts very well, but the difference between a good lawyer and a bad lawyer is the good lawyer's going to review it and make adjustments, or in the first place, prompt it properly. I mean, the one thing that I can't understand how they're managing it is in universities now.
Yeah.
I've got no idea how they are assessing people.
That's a good point.
So I think actually the thing that worries me more is just education as a whole.
Really good point to make. That's something I'm going to reflect. Because this is the Detached podcast, I have one last question to ask you. What would you detach yourself that's limiting you today?
I think often sometimes, and it may, interestingly tie into kind of what you were trying to get out of me earlier on, and it's probably something that I hadn't thought of, that, you ultimately got to ask yourself, what is kind of driving you? And is it your passion and kind of interests, or is it more, are you trying to prove something to someone else, or are you just being kind of competitive and trying to achieve something for the sake of it? I think I'm fortunate that I am doing something that I'm genuinely kind of interested in and passionate about, and I think we're lucky that we live somewhere where, I wouldn't say that there's a work-life balance at this stage of the company, but we live in a place where, when you have family, you're not as worried about doing a 18 hours day as, say, if I was back in the UK and the weather was terrible and there isn't anything for my kids to kind of go and do. And maybe you just kind of, get caught up in the sort of rat race and not kind of consider, these things in your life. But no, I think it's more just doing things on my own timeline and for myself and for my own interest rather than for other people.
Yeah. I think when you're so passionate, sometimes it's like, are you passionate because you just really care about something, or are you running from an insecurity to develop something as well?
Yeah, and exactly. Is it okay? Maybe is because my brothers were clever. Do I have to keep working and prove myself and achieve something that's greater? I probably would say that is true if it was something that I genuinely wasn't interested in. But I think I'm quite lucky that I'm in a sector that, even for non-medics, it's dinner table conversation. It's hugely topical at the moment, and I think you'd have to be living under a rock not to have some interest in some aspects of it. So I'm just riding that wave.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. Loved it.